The Necrons have returned to their tomb worlds, leaving the universe in chaos due to the war in heaven. The Eldari are amongst the races that are still standing, but they will have a new faction to contend with, the Forces of the Warp. While the Eldari Empire expanded, a new threat was growing behind the scenes in the Warp. The emotions and countless souls of the dead flooded the Warp, feeding the entities that resided there. 3 of them would carve out territory in the Immaterium and become the Chaos Gods we know of in the current setting. They were Born the Blood God, Tzeentch the Trickster God, and Nurgle the God of Rot and Decay. Each god has their own wants in the universe and have their own way of corrupting beings to their side. Born is the embodiment of murder and violence. He sits upon a throne made of skulls, deemed the Skull Throne. Each of its skulls are collected by one of his followers. He watches an arid land filled with gladiator pits, war zones, and rivers of boiling blood, encouraging violence and war amongst his people, and will corrupt people in the Materium to do the same. His armies consist of humanoid beings known as Bloodletters. These red creatures wear armor of brass and wield a variety of weapons, all forged at the base of the Skull Throne. They are highly disciplined, marching under Khorne's banner. However, when the first drop of blood is spilt, they fall into a frenzy. Accompanying them are fleshhounds and brass beasts used as mounts known as juggernauts. He also hosts beings known as greater demons, fragments of himself used to wage war in the Materium and lead his armies, the most common of them being bloodthirsters. They take the depiction of stereotypical demons of Earth's old religions, holding characteristics such as goat legs and a man's upper body that sports horns on its head and leathery wings. Nurgle the Plague Father is the embodiment of death and despair. In his realm, he sits in a mansion in the center of a putrid swamp of rot and decay, surrounded by mischievous little cretins referred to as Nurglings. Every day he concocts new diseases in his cauldron, and he plans to unleash upon the galaxy. These diseases are how he gains new followers. Infection leads to torment, despair, and a want to end the pain, leading them to making a deal with the Plague Father. They will be immune to such pains as long as they serve him. The infected individuals undergo a rapid, or in some cases with certain diseases, a slow decomposition of their flesh, to a certain extent before being halted by some means only the Plague God knows of. His armies are made up of these infected individuals referred to as poxwalkers. They have no control over their actions, and become nothing more than zombies doing their master's bidding. Above them are a variety of demons. There are plague bearers who have been blessed with Nurgle's rot and have become a more jovial zombie-like creature. These form the bulk of the army. There are a variety of animal-like demons, from the giant hopping plague toads to buzzing angry rock flies, down to the slug-like beasts of Nurgle. The greater demons of Grandfather Nurgle, like all other greater demons, are made of a fragment of their master. These fetid beings are known as Great Unclean Ones. They resemble a giant fat man made of rot with horns or deer-like antlers sprouting from their head, and their stomachs open to reveal a giant toothed maw. Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, is the embodiment of knowledge, magic, and trickery. His realm is a continuously shifting realm of blues, purples, and pinks. In it lays a crystal maze, and in the center of it, the Impossible Fortress. A crystal fortress of ever-changing rooms filled with libraries of all sorts of knowledge. Waiting at the very end is Tzeentch. Only the Trickster God himself and his Lords of Change have ever been able to navigate both the maze and fortress unaffected by its constant change. Tzeentch offers hope, and along with it, change, to his followers. This is in contrast to Nurgle's despair, and because of it, these two beings are at a constant war with each other. He hosts a demonic army made up with all sorts of jabbering creatures that have no solid form. From the small, jittering pink and blue horrors to the flying ray-like screamers and the dreaded flamers. Tzeentch's greater demons hold an avian-like appearance, sporting a snake-like neck and a bird's head. These demons have been dubbed the Lords of Change. On a side note, while all greater demons sport similar looks to their gods, Tzeentch does not. Unlike the other gods, Tzeentch does not really hold a form that can be associated with him. His constant change prevents that from happening. So there are many different depictions of him in all Warhammer lore. For example, in the sky he's depicted as multiple blinking eyes, or in the final book in the Grey Knights trilogy where the main character Alaric is granted a vision depicting Tzeentch as a man in a wizard cloak. This has not dissuaded the community, however, as there are numerous headcanon artwork depicting him as a variety of other beings. While the gods had begun to feast on the souls and emotions of the Materium, war in heaven continued, with the Old Ones creating beings that would be known as the Eldar Pantheon. These beings are best described as psychic weapons that were to help the Old Ones against the Catan. Alongside them were the Eldar, created as foot soldiers. From here, this is where things get muddy because of the Eldar mythology and the little events we know in the War in Heaven. The most likely chain of events is that the Pantheon were made along with the Eldar and helped fight the Necrons and Catan until the very end of the war and became dominant species in the universe. With age, they forgot their true gods, the Old Ones, and began to worship the Pantheon instead. Looking at the Eldar mythology, it tells a story similar to ancient Earth pagan stories, like the Greek or Roman pantheons. The pantheon consists of the Phoenix King, Assyrian, the oldest and wisest of the gods. He is the older brother to Cain, the god of war and murder. Gaia was the consort of both Assyrian and Cain. There was Vol, the smith god, an uncle to Isha, the goddess of life and fertility, and her daughter Lilith, the maiden goddess. Segarak, the laughing god, Moriaheg, the goddess of fate, Thoek, the silent wanderer, and Kurnus, the god of the hunt. The story goes as follows. It is said that Eldanish was the first of our people, fathered by Kurnus the hunter, and birthed by Isha the mother. At first he lived alone on the barren face of our ancient home. The world upon which he lived was empty, and as he gazed upon its barren expanse, his forlorn heart ached. So Isha, in her motherly love, wept a single tear of sorrow for her mortal son. Where her tear fell, burst forth the first life. Sunlit skies, verdant forests, and deep oceans sprang into existence, and with them all the creatures of land, air, and sea. Eldanish rejoiced in her love, feeling only boundless gratitude towards Isha. It is this love that the Mother Goddess gifted to our people. In those first days, Eldanish and the first of the Eldari communed freely with the gods, and from them they were granted the gifts of insight and emotion that would drive our people to greatness, and yet doom them also. In harmony did gods and mortals thrive, yet all would soon come to ruin, for even the gods themselves were slaves to their own desires. Long before the birth of Eldanish, Kurnus and Lilith were bound in courtship. Cain, lord of murder, looked upon the betrothed with furious envy, for he had long borne an unrequited love for the maiden. By every method he could conceive did he seek her hand, and yet at every attempt he was denied. So did jealousy smoulder and burn within the god's bitter heart. Much time passed until Kurnus' boundless desire saw him spurn Lilith in favour of Isha. By their union was born Eldanish. Lilith hid her jealousy beneath a facade of smiles and laughter, her envy curdling to resentment. One night, he saw a vision of Cain being torn apart by an army of mortal warriors. A plot of vengeance began to form within her mind. In secret, Lilith did whisper into the ear of Cain, describing unto him the horrors she had witnessed in her mind's eye. The Lord of Murder perceived her words as prophecy, and took up his blade, just as Lilith had planned. Cain's fury had been awakened. The war god resolved to slaughter every mortal Eldari. Lilith smiled broadly, for Kurnos and Isha would soon know true grief. So did Cain stride into the mortal realm and vent his seething anger upon Isha's children. When the mother learned of his murderous onslaught and of the suffering he had wrought upon those she loved, she wept uncontrollably. Keening wails of grief rippled through heaven with such anguish that almighty Assyrian could not help but hear them. The Phoenix King soon learned of all that had transpired. Assyrian, with the same wisdom he gifted to the Eldari, forged an impenetrable barrier between heaven and the mortal realm. So was Cain's murderous rampage halted. Yet Isha knew no end to her sorrow, for though her progeny was safe from the attentions of the Lord of Murder, she could no longer communicate with her beloved offspring. How poor, sorrowful Isha wept for that which she had lost. She had been torn from her children by the Lord of Murder's jealous rage and her own father's pitiless justice. Kurnos too felt the pang of sorrow within his breast until he could stand no longer to gaze upon his beloved Isha's wretched misery. To Vol, the mastersmith, Isha and Kurnos pleaded for aid, knowing that only he could undo Assyrian celestial artifice. Vol, uncle of Kurnos and Isha, while reluctant to break his brother Assyrian's decree, could not bear to hear his niece's weeping. He sympathized with her plight and agreed to aid the parents' cause. From Isha's streaming tears he forged waystones that sparkled like stars. Through these shimmering jewels, Isha could once more speak to her children, and so she did. Isha and Kurnos taught much to the Eldari, keeping their communication with their children secret from their fellow gods. Yet as time passed, the two became arrogant, certain that none would discover their transgressions. In one such careless moment, Cain overheard them. Bitter, jealous, and desperate for vengeance, Cain brought all he had heard to his brother. Disappointment and anger coursed through Assyrian in equal measure. He had been disobeyed because of parents' love for their children, but he had been disobeyed nonetheless. Though it pained him greatly, Assyrian declared before his fellow gods that Isha and Kurnos were to be turned over to Cain to do with as he saw fit. The mother and the hunter were secured with bonds of flame and scorching iron and cast into a burning pit to endure the torments of the Lord of Murder, far from the sight of mortals and gods alike. For countless years they suffered Cain's torments, deprived of the light of the heavens, and severed from the children they so loved. Vol begged Cain to show mercy on his niece and nephew. Guilt racked his soul, for he had aided them in their scheme, and longed to see them freed. After much bargaining, an accord was reached. The Master Smith would forge 100 swords for the Lord of Murder, each mightier than the last. In return for Vol's artifice, Cain would free his prisoners. Cain granted Vol but a single year to complete this task. Vol laboured day and night, fashioning blades the like of which no mortal hand could strike. Each was a wondrous work of art, wrought in the star metal, sun bronze, and the dust of shattered nebulae. Yet as the year drew to a close, Vol knew he had failed, for a single sword remained incomplete. To conceal this failing, which would have seen his agreement with Cain voided, Master Smith turned to trickery. Amongst the newly forged weapons, he hid a blade of mortal construction. When Cain discovered the deception, his rage was terrifying to behold. Branding Vol a cheat and a liar, he demanded vengeance. War in heaven had begun. This conflict cast the gods against one another, and the heavens shook with the thunder of battle. The Eldari too were divided by conflict, as the fighting bled into the mortal realm. Only great Assyrian, in his infinite wisdom, refused to align himself with any other. Thus, when the war ended, the Phoenix King remained Lord of Vol and Cain both. The final battle of conflict saw Vol and Cain cross swords in single combat. Vol wielded the blade Anaris, Light of Dawn, 100th blade he had promised to Cain, now completed and imbued with all the art of his mastery. Despite the might of Inaris, however, Vol could not match Cain's martial skill. The Forge God was overpowered and cast out of heaven, broken in mind and body. Cain would later enslave Vol, strapping him to his anvil with iron chains of his own creation. Cain roared in his triumph and reached down to claim Inaris as his own. Yet at the moment of the Lord of Murder's victory, Falchu, Falcon, consort of the Great Hawk, descended to pluck up Inaris in its giant talons. As Cain cried out in impotent fury, Falchu bore the glimmering weapon to the heavens. Cain's rage burned bright and hot once more. Still he sought vengeance upon those who had wronged him. Long ago he had fought side by side with Eldanish, the Lord of Murder, granting his mortal student many victories upon the battlefield and promising him further power in return for his fealty. The upstart mortal had refused and instead taken the side of Isha and Kurnus. So did Cain descend upon Eldanish in a murderous rage. Falchu, seeing the fight unfold, bore into the hands of Eldanish the great sword of Inaris, the hope that this blade may grant the mortal hero a slim chance of defeating Cain in battle. However, even armed with Vol's finest blade, Eldanish was no match for the god of war. Before he could so much as land a blow upon Cain's towering form, the mortal champion was torn apart. War in heaven had ended with Cain, its final victor. The Lord of Murder held Inaris aloft and let out a bellow of triumph. As he did so, Falchu and the Great Hawk descended from the heavens and took in their talons the broken body of Eldanish, bearing the dead warrior's corpse aloft and setting it in the firmament. There it became the Red Moon, which dominated the skies above the Eldari homeworld for eons, as a constant reminder of the great champion's bloody demise. It remained there until our people descended into depravity, born the malefic being known as She Who Thirsts, and saw the heart of their empire consumed by corruption and evil. However, Cain's slaughter of Eldanish would not be the final act of the war in heaven. That honour would fall to Assyrian. So appalled was the Phoenix King by the slaying of the first lord of the Eldari that he had laid upon Cain a curse. Eldanish's blood would forever drip from the Lord of Murder's hand, reminding all of what he had done. Thus, he has been known ever since as Kala Mencha Cain, Cain the Bloody-Handed. Having built such a strong empire and being immortal, the Eldar began to forget the troubles they once had to deal with and began to focus on indulging themselves. Now, important thing you need to know about the Eldar is that they have a strong connection to the war and experience emotion in a more intense way than humans do. When a human is exposed to the same sense of euphoria over and over again, it slowly becomes dull. They seek to achieve that feeling again and again, feel the same sense of euphoria, which becomes harder to achieve as they're exposed to it more often. The same can be said with the Eldar with emotions. When you live for thousands of years with the same feelings, it does not affect you the same way, and you seek something more to feel that pleasure. They will do just that, looking for ways to obtain the feeling from art to music to theatre all the way to the pleasures of the flesh. Slowly these avenues became dull, and they would seek to improve them, creating pleasure cults. Artists added blood to their paintings, musicians added screams to their songs, theatres added pain, and sadism became common. This too would eventually grow dull. Artists would soon use their own blood and murder others as one-time art pieces. Musicians would use the screams of dying and torture to their songs. Theatres would end with the death of the audience, and sadism would turn to straight torture. These pleasure cults continued until the streets ran red with blood. Not all the Eldari fell victim to this, however. Many saw the slow decay of the empire and were disgusted. They took their ships and fled to the very edges of the empire, cutting themselves off and devolving to primitive beings, becoming known as the Exodites. Other Eldari saw the coming fall of their race and fled to craft worlds. These ships were the size of continents and were made up of a material known as wraithbone, and allowed those who lived there to remain safe from the corruption of their world. The emotions of excess pleasure and debauchery flooded into the warp, allowing an entity to gorge on the pleasure and pain. In the 25th millennium, the fourth and final chaos god, known as Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Pleasure, or She Who Thirsts, was born. Her birth was not a quiet one. She exploded into the warp, causing massive warp storms and tearing a hole in the materium where the capital of the Eldar Empire once sat. This hole would be named the Eye of Terror, and would be a portal that led directly into the warp itself. All the Eldar that died in her birth would not be reborn like they always would. Instead, they were greeted by the gaping maw of Slaanesh. She would consume their souls, leaving them to be tortured for all eternity. The pantheon of gods would not be safe either. Almost all were eaten by Slaanesh. Cain was the only one that put up a good fight, one which he would lose and be shattered into a million shards and scattered across the galaxy. These shards would be collected by the Craftworld Eldar, and shrines would be built to communicate with the weakened murder god, and in times of great struggle, a sacrifice would be given to summon an avatar of Cain onto the battlefield. Isha also survived the Battle of Slaanesh. Her cries were heard by an unlikely saviour, the Plague Father Nurgle. He took Isha into his realm and locked her in a cage, hanging over his shoulder. Rumours say every disease he brews in his cauldron, he tests them on Isha. If he is unhappy with the disease, he drinks it all and throws it back up into his cauldron, starting from scratch. If he is pleased, he pours it down a drain leading to the materium to spread his creation. Some say when his back is turned, Isha whispers the cure to mortals in hopes that she can combat the Plague Father. Segarak also survived the fall of the Eldar. He fled into the webway, avoiding the Prince of Pleasure's grasp. To this day, he remains locked away in a vault in the Black Library, a vast library with all the history of the known universe. There he is guarded by the enigmatic Harlequins, Eldar who chose to worship and protect him. The gods' realm contorted and became a pit of temptations. Lying at the center of the pit was Slaanesh herself, feasting on all the pain and suffering she could obtain. Slaanesh is unique to all the other Chaos Gods in that she is the only one referred to as a woman, that at the same time has masculine titles, such as Prince, as if to show that her temptations are not constricted to any gender. The same goes for her armies of demons. While referred to as demonettes and look more feminine in nature, they hold masculine attributes as well. These demonettes come to mortals as a beautiful being that no person can resist looking at, to tempt them into all sorts of excess pleasures. Slowly but surely, as they become more resilient, their victims require more intense feelings. Discovering the demonette's true hideous form too late, the greater demons of Slaanesh are said to be some of the most attractive and irresistible beings in existence. However, looking upon their true form, they are no better looking than the demonettes. While the demonettes wield claws for hands, the greater demon counterparts can hold up to 4 arms adorned with claws and other weapons. To die as an Eldar is to be sent to an eternity of torture, but ways to avoid death have been found. Craftworld Eldar use spirit stones. These gems are embedded into their armor, so when one dies, their soul is stored within, waiting to be retrieved by their brethren, and inserted into the Craftworld's Infinity Circuit. The Infinity Circuit houses all the dead Eldar, and allows for their souls to pass through the Wraithbone and give wisdom to those who seek it. The Drukhari, also commonly referred to as the Dark Eldar, was the third faction that survived the fall. They were in the webway when Slaanesh was born, and were protected because of it. Every passing moment, they come closer and closer to Slaanesh's reach, and they do not possess spirit stones to protect them. Instead, paradoxically, they do exactly what Slaanesh herself enjoys, maintaining their youth and agile selves, keeping old age away through various methods of torture. If, however, a Drukhari is to fall, their soul will be lost forever. All is not lost for the Eldari. Rumours have spread that a new god is forming, Yened, the god of the dead. They believe Uned will form from the souls of those in the Infinity Circuit, and will be one to do battle with Slaanesh. Its victory over Slaanesh could lead to the salvation of the Eldar race. The Eldar that worship this god believe once the last of their kind is erased, their souls will create Uned, and they will finally be free from Slaanesh's curse.